back to Ghosted, Gagged and Gay, the podcast where we get real about queer love, messy relationship stories, and the healing it takes to build the connections we actually deserve. I'm your host, Lonay, relationship coach and rapid transformational therapy practitioner. And today we're diving into a conversation about love, liberation, and what it really means to uplift Black queer folks in this moment. Today, I'm joined by someone whose work is such a gift to our community, Dr. Jon Paul, also known as Dr. Jonathan Paul Higgins. They are an educator, writer, speaker, and media critic who's passionate about amplifying underrepresented stories, especially Black, queer, fat, non-binary voices. They are the creator and host of the award-winning Black Fat Femme podcast and the author of Black Fat Femme Reveal the Power of Visibly Queer Voices in Media and How to Love Yourself. You might have seen them on Netflix, Nailed It, Hulu's Our America, Who I Am Meant to Be, or speaking at TEDx and SXSW. Dr. Jon Paul, I'm so excited to have you on Ghosted, Gagged and Gay. Welcome to the show.
Oh, hi, welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited that you're here too.
Yeah.
So Dr. John, your work lives at the intersection of blackness, queerness, fatness, and media, and you
hmm
talk a lot about liberation. When you think about love and relationships through the lens or through that lens, what does a liberated, affirming love story look like for a Black queer person right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've been pushing slash been talking a lot about in my work these days is the need for folks to feel safe. I think that's been the biggest thing, and often people think, well, I'm in a relationship with someone, and I love them or I care for them, and um, most of the time, people will assume that that means safety, and I don't necessarily believe that to be true, right? Being safe to talk about your experience as a Black person, being safe enough to talk about, um, you know, the ever changing ways that we think about what queerness means to us or what it feels like to us. But more than anything, being able to still love out loud. I think that's the idea, the safety and the feeling of no matter where I go, no matter what I do, I feel safe with the person who I'm with because I know that they'll be behind me or they'll stand by me, right? And so I think that's really what I think a lot about these days, considering that the world is not really safe for us in a lot of different ways. I think the idea of being and I don't mean this just in a relationships, with a person that you're, connected to. I'm thinking friendships, I'm thinking family, I'm thinking anyone that you're in a relationship with, being able to know that they are going to, stand 10 toes down for you and support you in whatever aspect you need the support.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great
Mm.
answer, actually. And it really highlighted everything that is going on right now. So, being in a relationship nowadays is not enough to have this safety, especially for certain demographics,
Yeah.
or certain demographics have it even harder, even within like minorities. So,
hmm
I mean, being gay or queer is already a minority, and then you have this extra layer and of like, yeah, like when it comes to racism and all of that,
hmm
especially in certain parts of the world right now. So
Yeah.
so Dr. John, you're very visibly black and you also, yeah, like this is your platform, like being black,
Right.
fat, and femme in your work and online.
hmm
So how has that visibility shaped the way people show up for you in dating and relationships, both in really beautiful ways and in more challenging ways?
Yeah, I think so. I do have to say, coming into this conversation, I've been married for 15 years, and so being in a relationship for 15 years, I think there's been this. I wouldn't say even transformation, but I think there's been this growth of being in a relationship with someone who, one who isn't Black, having to kind of understand what you're talking about. And this is, for the listener, I talk very openly about what intersectionality is, because I think it's important for folks to know that you can't talk about the identities of, of a person without talking about intersectionality. And so when I talk about intersectionality, you have to think about oppression, right? So you have to think about what it means to be oppressed as a Black person, what it means to be oppressed as a queer person, what it means to be oppressed as a fat person, and then how all of those oppressions kind of, move and work together, right? The idea of navigating not even just micro and macro aggressions, but just aggressions in general. And so I say all of that to say, having a partner, sometimes say, this thing happened, I don't fully understand what that was, you know, can, do, lovingly asking questions, to be able to further understand what frustrations or what agitations or what, minor, really just how it feels sometimes to even be degraded, right? Like having someone stop and say, what was that moment for you? What did that feel like? How can I support you, right, in that? And so I think that's really what it comes down to in love and liberation for me in regards to kind of being in a relationship with someone, or even the challenging part of this question, right? Having to sit down with someone and you being frustrated and having to explain to them what that frustration is and how frustrating that can be. Um, excuse me, but loving them enough to know that part of the work comes with, the part of the love comes with having to, have them learn, and then eventually they are able to just jump in, right? They'll understand what the situation is or what the frustration is before you have a chance to respond to it. And I think that's the part that I love, right? This idea of what's beautiful is that, after being with someone for 15 years and having them fully understand all elements of who you are, knowing that they can kind of jump in to be kind of your buffer before something terrible happens or before you get to a place where you're extremely frustrated. And so there's kind of this delicate dance that you have to do when you're in a relationship with someone. And I think that's the thing, being, kind of on both sides of it, having to love them through the frustration, but then also watching the beauty grow when they get it and they can, again, they can be your advocate before you have to do it for yourself. So,
Very beautiful. Yeah, and I'm happy that you are in this place right now.
mhm.
And yeah, like when you talked about like the intersectionality of things, I totally agree with that actually. Like with my clients at in my work, so it's also something I have to consider all the time, when depending on the background and so on, and it's different for everyone, or like
Mhm.
this combination of different layers, it also affects people in different ways. Um, so I totally agree. And is there like any moment, so going back, or maybe during the relationship, or going back before you had this this long relationship by now, um, was there like, when was like the first moment when you realized that this is actually a challenge? I mean, I know this is something
Mhm.
you've lived like your whole life, but when was like this moment of awareness that came to you and became like, oh wow, I'm facing something much more challenging than I thought it would be?
Yeah. I don't know if there's a specific moment I can think of, but I will say that I think one of the biggest hurdles I think we have had to that I've had to kind of like work through is my partner understanding the racism in the queer community. I think that's been the biggest thing, right? I think, it's not enough to just understand the racism of the world, but I think that when you get into talking about the ways that racism shows up as a queer person, in the ways that it shows up in the community, it makes it very, I wouldn't even say challenging. Like I said, I think the best word is frustrating because you're trying to help them understand something that maybe they don't even understand, right? They think, when they hear the word equality, they go, oh, okay, equality, let's celebrate everybody. Everyone's welcome in the community. But then I think there's this reality of no, we're not all welcome in the community. And so, and I think it gets harder when you start thinking about body image and you start thinking about the ways um, that society celebrates, white queer men in a way that they don't celebrate Black queer people. And so there's like this kind of, like I said, there's this dance that you have to do. And I think that's the challenging thing, right? When you understand when someone thinks queerness is a monolith and that everything It's kind of like this blanket of like joy and happiness. And it's like, no, not everyone in the queer community has the same experience. It's the same way that, I've had to stop and listen to disabled people talk about what it's like for them to be disabled in the queer community. And then you add in the layer of being Black and you add in the layer of being fat. There's all these other elements. And so I think the more challenging part of it all is understanding the nuance. And I think helping someone to comprehend what that nuance is probably the most challenging moment. The moment when you think that it's supposed to be, like I said, a universal experience, and you have to stop and you have to tell someone it's not. And I think and then have them kind of have their own awakening or have to walk through their own frustrations with understanding or not understanding why it's not a universal experience.
Oh wow, yeah, yeah, totally right. And I feel like the racism in the queer community is like very well hidden somehow because
Oh, yes.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because like when somebody hears the word queer, then they immediately assume like okay, they accept everyone, but actually
Mm-mm.
you're right, there's a lot of racism even within the queer community. Um And when it shows up in my, like, I don't know if I'm, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but when it shows up, I feel like it shows up in a more intense way
Very.
because you like somehow we are programmed to not expect it from the queer community,
Mm-hmm.
and then it
Mm-hmm.
hits like even harder. I was actually um like I only recently knew about this, like the existence of this
Mm.
when I started meeting more queer people in the last couple of years,
Yeah.
and I was really shocked by that. Like how like I never thought that these two can coexist together, but it's very much there.
Mm-hmm. Very much.
Unfortunately. So, and I feel like it's a very delicate topic, right? Because then, like, when someone from the queer community tries to kind of criticize the queer community, then um, it it receives a lot of backlash because they're like, oh, we should stand together, we should do this, we should not fight, and so on. But that's not true. We should like still I mean, there's no perfect community, and each community it can grow and it can get better and develop over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Dr. John, a lot of like my listeners really struggle with feeling too much or not enough, too queer, too emotional, too loud, too soft. How have you navigated those messages for yourself? And what would you say to someone who's carrying that into their love life?
Yeah. I think I think the hardest part is to recognize that, well, no, so I'll say this. I think one of the things that we have to remind ourselves of is that a lot of the things that we are taught are, and this is what I talk about in my book. A lot of the things that we are taught are technically, or in our mind might be seen as bad, are the things that make us shine. And so I think for us is, and this is something that I've had to navigate and I've kind of had to work through my own way, recognizing that we're not for everybody, right? And the love you have for yourself and the love of the love that you found for who you are, it takes time. I think people think, for me, right, I show up as this very, confident, very assured, very, very much myself. And I tell people this is a lot of like what you're seeing. Yeah, you may come to the podcast, you may come to my book, you may come to some of my articles, and you may see a very fully formed person. But this is, I would say a good maybe 5 to 10 years of hardcore therapy, unpacking all of the trauma and all of the experiences that I've lived through. And it's not something that just happened overnight. It wasn't something I just woke up one day and was like, oh, I love me. No, it took a lot of hard, very rigorous work. And so I think when you're thinking about being in a relationship with someone, and this is something that I've had to actualize too, even in my own relationship, people have to do their own work. And a lot of people don't recognize how much work they have to do until they get into a relationship, right? When someone's telling them about all of the things that they need to do work around. And so I think for me, that's the most important thing to remind someone of is that, you know, you're both two individuals with two different lived experiences, and you're bringing them together to, create a life, or you're bringing other folks in to create a life. And so you're dealing with multitudes of different experiences. And so I think it's very much this idea of, one, giving yourself space to kind of actualize who you want to be, but also giving other people space to understand who they are, and then recognizing that not everyone is going to understand or to recognize or love the person that you're becoming. And I've made that, I've made that acceptance for my own self, that there may come a day that my partner wakes up one day and says, I don't like who you've become, right? And we become two different people, and it's time to move on. But there also is a part of me that says my partner loves the person that I currently am, and I have to live in that, and I want to be in that. And so I say all of that to say I think it's, recognizing that so much of who you want to be and who you're becoming is a journey, but also giving people space to figure out who they are as well. And yeah, I hate how cliche it is to say do the work, but it really is work. It is work to love yourself. It is work to love other people. It is work to let other people love you. And so, yeah, to be in that.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely. I always say, loving others is much easier than loving ourselves, even
T.
though it
Mm-hmm.
should be the other way around.
Right.
But yeah, you said it really, you put it in a really nice way.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about, like how to show up, whether for yourself or others, or how you're like representing yourself. Um, or how others see you, whether it's like in dating or relationships or in public or
Mm-hmm.
media platforms. So since you are a media critic and you
Mm-hmm.
see firsthand how Black queer folks are represented on screen,
Mm-hmm.
how do you think those portrayals impact what we believe we deserve in relationships and the kind of love we end up accepting?
Yeah, this is a great question because I don't think people think about this enough. And I talk about this, I think it's in chapter 4, chapter 5 of my book. In my own lived experience of growing up, I always saw queer folks, specifically queer Black characters, and there's not many, honey. I always saw them as the sidekick, or I always saw them as the second, kind of the second level. And you start to kind of take that on, right? You're okay with being in a lot of ways, someone's punching bag. And that's because in a lot of TV and a lot of film that we see, that's basically what queer characters are, right? We take the hits. We oftentimes get laughed at. Folks are usually making fun of you in a show or a film, and it's this whole, oh, I've had to learn to love myself, but no one's ever questioning why we're going through it in the first place, right? And so all of that to be said, I think that's something that we've, and this is something that I still have to, like, even like I said, even though I'm in a relationship, I'm still having to remind myself of, like, the love that I deserve, to tell someone. We sometimes become okay with accepting less. We become okay with people treating us unfairly, or doing things to us that are in a lot of ways harmful, but because we justify it as, oh, they love us, or they're our friends, or they're our family, it's okay, right? Or we see it on TV all the time, and so we start to think that it's just a thing. And the reality is we deserve so much more. And so I think that the thing that I've been so vocal about, the thing that I'm constantly telling people is, it is okay for you to up the ante, to tell people you need to show up more for me, or I need you to do more for me, or I need you to stop doing X, Y, and Z to me, right? And I think that's something that we don't hear a lot. We don't see queer characters. We don't see Black queer characters standing up for themselves in television and film. And I would say, I know you say you live in Germany and I live in America. I think it's really hard, because media is so different in so many different places. But I think it has such a strong, regardless of where you are, it has such a strong impact on how you see yourself. And so a lot of times we see ourselves as less because we recognize that either, one, we're not seen at all in television, or when we are seen in television, we're usually a punching bag. And so we start to believe that that's what we deserve in our lived experiences. And I'm hoping, and I'm continuing to press through my work, that we need to be the opposite of that. We need to be very vocal about telling people what we deserve, or being more vocal about what we feel we deserve, and what we will accept or what we won't accept, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I always like in my coaching program, I'm always um like bringing awareness to like towards the media we're consuming, to really
Mm-hmm.
be aware, like when we like for example a song we're listening to or something we're watching or even use or anything, to just like be aware, like is it something that is true? Is it something that I want to like incorporate in my belief system or not? Because more likely than not, when we're watching something, we're like not filtering
Mm-hmm.
anything out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of like just absorbing all these like core beliefs and repeating them when it comes like while watching like different shows or movies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's very dangerous. Like that's how we form our core beliefs, is like when we don't really filter with our consciousness what we don't want to believe in. So it is something that I always say, okay, like listen to the lyrics of the songs, like try to
Mm-hmm.
be aware of that. And also the stories that we're watching. And even if you still want to watch it, but at least like bring awareness to this and like be aware of it and
Mm-hmm.
say like, no, this is not something I want to believe in. I'm just watching it for fun, and it's not something I want to advocate for.
Right.
And you're right, like in like even when you see like queer people in shows these days, like in very modern shows, as you said, like there's still either the cliche like best friend, gay best friend, or something like that, and it's not something, yeah, like as you said, just like a supportive role or someone who's a punching bag or like a emotional sponge to deal with all of the emotional trauma of the other heteronormative people and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So, for listeners who aren't Black but really want to uplift Black queer folks and be there and be like sensible and sensitive to them, especially in dating, friendships, and community, what are some concrete ways they can show up better beyond just reposting something on Instagram?
Yeah. My biggest thing is, and I've said this and I'll continue to keep saying this, a lot of folks love Black people, love Black queer people, but they don't have relationships with Black queer people.
True.
And a lot of folks have, people love our culture, people love how we show up, but I find, and this is something I'm really notorious for. Like I thumb through people's, especially when I see people using our vernacular or people using, or whatever, resharing things. I constantly go through like Instagram or go through, social media just to see what interactions folks are having with folks, and noticing that a lot of folks don't spend time with us or don't won't show up for us in a lot of different ways. And so I think the best piece of advice that I would give is, I'm not telling you to go out and to, be very, what's the word I'm looking for? No one say touchy feely, but pet. I don't want us to become a pet, or I don't want it to make it feel like we're your pet. But I say this to say, look for ways to be in community with us. Look for ways to support our communities. Look for ways to learn from us in a very non, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, there's so many, engage with us. And I think that when I say engage, I think, ask the questions, but be ready for the very difficult answers. Be ready to do your own work, but also be ready to do in general. I think that's something that I'm constantly telling folks, is that, we can't always be the ones on the front lines taking the hits over the injustice that we face, right? We need accomplices too. We need advocates as well. And so I think that's we could talk for hours about the ways that people can show up, but I think that the number one way is being intentional about the ways that you engage with Black LGBTQ people, or with with folks who are a part of the community that are doing the work and that are out on the front lines, trying to make the world better for us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dr. John. And when you think about the future of Black queer love on screen, in our communities, and in our own lives, what actually gives you hope right now? Because I know we talked a lot about what's going wrong at the moment,
Right.
but is there anything that you see like, okay, this is giving me hope?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's really been giving me a lot of hope, actually, it's funny because so by the time you probably hear this, my episode will have already come out for my show. And we talked about that a couple of episodes. We talk about that this week about this idea of what's giving us hope or where are we seeing the beauty. And I will say that I think the biggest thing that I have the thing that I love the most, or the place where I'm seeing the most beauty, is really just with queer LGBTQ youth, specifically Black youth, who are learning very early to demand the things that they want, to demand the ways that they want to be treated, or telling people, actively telling people what they want or what they need in order to feel validated. And I think that that's the thing that makes me feel so hopeful is, when I was for 12, 13, 14, I didn't have the language, right? I didn't know I didn't know what vulnerability was. I didn't know what liberation was. I didn't know what advocacy was. I didn't know I had the right to tell people, no, you can't treat me this way. And a lot of, and I hate saying the kids as if I'm like so old, because I don't really, well, I am a little older, but I don't feel old. But I say all of that to say, like, seeing youth, who are 12, 13, 14, 15, and are out telling their parents, you have to love me this way or don't love me at all. And it's not only affirming, but it's just so refreshing to know that there's so many kids, worldwide, who know their worth at a very young age. And I think to myself, if I would have had that when I was their age, I think I would have saved myself so much pain and anguish throughout my 20s and my 30s, right? And you live and you learn, and I think sometimes you have to go through things in order to be something for someone else. So I'm happy that I'm happy relatively. I'm happy I went through that, because now I have a platform to be able to tell people who are not there what to do. But I think for me, I think that's the thing that makes me so happy, is that, and so hopeful. It gives me a lot of hope, is to know that my work, my experiences, are catching people at a very young age and are reminding them that they have the right to be who they want to be, loudly and proudly, and to demand the respect that they deserve, so early on in their lives. It's really, like I said, refreshing is the word.
Yeah, I actually never thought about that. Like when you were talking, I had goosebumps. I was like, yeah, this is actually very true. Like you see it now that how like the younger generations are really standing up for themselves and demanding how they should be loved, not just taking the breadcrumbs they're being
Right.
like thrown, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
at. And yeah, and your book centers a lot about like self-love as something radical, right?
Mm-hmm.
For someone who's exhausted by, ghosting, rejection, and feeling unseen from the past, what's one small self-love practice you would invite them to start with today, like with the listeners, basically?
Yeah. Oh God, self-love. I think, I'm gonna say this. Being kind, I think this is what I'm really working on. Being kinder to yourself. I think, we talk so much about self-love, and we're worthy of this, but just like, I constantly have to remind myself, a lot of the mean and terrible things that I say to myself in my head, I would never say to anyone else. I would never say out loud to anyone. So why am I saying that to me? And I think that's, oh, you're ugly, or you're fat, or you're this, or you're that. Like, why would you say that to yourself? You would never want to say that to anyone else. And so I think that's the piece of, self-love, or, words of affirmation that I would want to give to someone, is that you deserve to treat yourself well too. And if there are people in your life who are not treating you well, let them go. It's so, yeah, it may feel terrible to be like, wow, I have to let this person go, or this friendship go, or this relationship go. But if you're not happy, then you're doing yourself a huge disservice. And so, I think that's the bit of hope that I would want to leave for somebody, is to let them know and recognize that they deserve to give themselves the same happiness that they probably give or the love that they give to someone else.
Yeah, I actually always say that like treat yourself as if you would treat your best friend. Like if there's something you cannot say to your best friend, just don't say it to yourself either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, being kind is, even though it sounds so cliche and so like overused, right? Like this words like self-love, be kind, and so on. But I think it became cliche for a reason, and because it's true, and we have
Mm-hmm.
to do that, like to do the work, as you said. Um, so before we end like this episode, so what is your current venture? What are you doing? What are you up to these days?
Well, what am I up to? I think the biggest thing right now is, putting myself behind my own podcast, which is Black Fat Femme. You all can find on the iHeart Network. But we drop every Tuesday. The other thing that I think, like I said, I think, I'm in the process of creating, I don't know if I want to call it a mini doc or a mini series, I don't know, but it will be some form of a documentary along, whether it be short form or long form. But I think that's the thing I'm thinking about pouring myself into these next couple of weeks/months. I'm hoping next year January, that's going to be the thing I'm going to really kind of like pour myself into, is creating a living visual that I can put out into the world that tells Black fat femmes specifically that they have the right, to really, you know affirmations and words and things that they have learned, how we're using that to build a much stronger world. But that's ultimately where I'm at. But yeah, that's really what I'm working on. I will be working on that, raising money for that, and pushing it, and trying to get it to where it needs to be. So.
Sounds amazing. Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
looking forward to also watching that when it's out. And yeah, and
Mhm.
I will put also the links to your book, and if somebody's interested in reading that, and also, yeah, whatever. I think you shared your links with me, so I
Mhm.
will make sure that they're in the episode description. So thank you so much, Dr. John, for joining me today. It was really a pleasure talking with you. You were like the perfect guest today.
Thank you.
And for the listeners, thank you also for listening. And if you have a story to tell, something you would like to share, you can always be my next guest. And if you are looking for support, you can always book a free call with me, and I will be more than happy to help in any way possible.
Oh,
And
thank you.
until then, please be kind to yourself and to each other, and be gentle, and let's stay queer.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.